Welcome everyone to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. Today I am very pleased to be joined by Noa Lazimi, international relations expert at the Miskav Institute in Jerusalem. Noa, it's so great to have you back on the briefing.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
Absolutely. We have a lot to discuss. Right now we are in the aftermath of the a phenomenal attack on Iran, and a lot of people are thinking about what is happening with Iran's nuclear ambitions even after the strike. And all eyes are really in Israel, focused on Gaza and finally finishing this war, destroying Hamas. But there's always a lot of things happening in the Middle East. And you have an expertise in a number of topics. Among them are Syria and Turkey. And while all eyes are on Iran and Gaza, there's a lot happening to the north of Israel. And we're going to discuss that right now. So many people who have been following the news heard about how the PKK, which is a Kurdish terrorist group fighting Turkey, laid down their weapons and giving more power to Turkey. Now, giving more power to Turkey has tremendous implications in terms of Iran and in terms of the relationship with Israel. So, if we can really begin with that news item and how you think that really impacts what is happening with Israel, with Turkey, and the broader impact in the Middle East for that change of events. What can you share with us?
So, after 40 years of armed struggle, the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, has decided to lay down their arms and dissolve. Now, this decision came after the leader and the founder of the movement, who is 75 years old and serving life sentence in a prison near Istanbul, urged his followers to end the hostilities against Turkey and try to pursue a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Now, now for Erdogan, this is obviously a major victory, and he's going to try to capitalize on this achievement by demanding that the PKK declaration be applied not only in Turkey, but also to PKK affiliated groups outside of Turkey, including those groups operating in Syria, for example. And also, that move can also improve the Turkish standing in Europe. We know that for many years now, Turkey and many European nations have had quite strained relations. That's for a number of reasons. The Turkish support of Russia, and the fact that the Turks opposed the accession of two new members into the NATO alliance, and also general human rights violations across Turkey and non-democratic practices like those we just saw in March surrounding the arrest of Erdogan's political rival. So, if the reconciliation process between the PKK and the Turkish authorities turns out to be successful, this may portray Turkey in a more favorable light in the eyes of the Europeans.
Thank you. So let's hone in on Turkey for a moment in the aftermath of Israel's strikes on Iran. How do you think all of that has shaped Turkey's strategy in the Middle East?
So, to be sure, Turkey views Iran's weakening in the region with great satisfaction. And that's despite the relatively pro Iranian approach in the Turkish foreign policy. But that being said, I don't think that the Turks are interested in seeing a complete regime collapse in Iran. And that's because their primary fear is that in the event of Iran's disintegration, then the Kurdish minority will attempt to reestablish this Kurdish republic. And this may also fuel similar sentiment within Turkey itself. And so obviously the Turks are not interested in bringing about such a scenario. Now, as to the Israeli airstrikes in Iran and the successful operation, so I think that the Turks have learned some valuable lessons from this operation, and they're probably going to apply some of these insights across key areas. So, one is the intelligence gaps. I think the Turks were probably pretty amazed by Israel's remarkable ability to target senior officials in Iran's high command structures, and that's one critical point. And number two would be Air power, air capabilities. Turkey is already a major player in the global drone industry, but now it's trying to acquire the F-35 fighter jets, just like Israel has, the Israel Air Force. And so that's one goal for Turkey. And also, the war with Iran underscored the importance of advanced air defense systems. So Turkey is now working on the development of its own Iron Dome system. Lastly, number three would be the ballistic missiles development. So the Turks have been allocating a lot of resources in the last year to the development of ballistic missiles, new ones, new models like the Typhoon, for example, and other with longer range, potentially reaching Israel. Now, I'm not saying that that's their plan at the moment, but it's something we should take into account. And in any case, different models are currently under development.
Thank you so much. Now, there's of course been a lot of talk in the news about normalization with Syria or the lack thereof, and we'll get to that. But before we talk about Syria, what can you share with us in terms of Turkey's interests in Syria?
So it's important to know that the Turkish involvement in Syria began during the Syrian civil war. Under the guise of supporting democratization of the Syrian people, President Erdogan backed various rebel groups, and one of them is HTS, the organization that led the decisive and swift takeover of Damascus. Now, in addition to that, the Turks also launched military campaigns into Syria in the attempt to drive the Kurdish militias as far away as possible from the Syria-Turkey border. And in fact, Turkey established de facto security zone, like a security buffer, on Syrian soil that functions as a Turkish-speaking province, like an independent area where there are roads, hospital, infrastructure, and even Turkish currency. So when Assad was toppled, the reshuffling of the cards worked to Ankara's advantage. And now it's trying to turn Syria into this pro Turkish client state under Ankara's leadership and within the spirit of the Muslim Brotherhood. This will help Turkey achieve three main objectives. One is to dismantle the Kurdish autonomies and force the Kurdish armed groups to disarm and dissolve and maybe even potentially merge into the Syrian army. Number two is to create the conditions for the return of over 3.5 million refugees, Syrian refugees that are currently living in Turkey and are causing some level of internal unrest. And number three, this will help Turkey to position itself as the dominant stakeholder in the region, in Syria, and perhaps in the entire region. And lastly, I want to stress that there is also a religious aspect to the Turkish policies in Syria. So, unlike the Russians, for example, Syria is not just a distant territory like a satellite state that gives them the access to the Mediterranean. That's important. But for the Turks, it's way more than that. It's part of the new Ottoman ambitions of President Erdogan. So we have to remember that until the First World War, until the end of the First World War, Syria had been ruled by the Ottoman Empire for 400 years. So the removal of the Iranians from the scene is some kind of a closure for the Turks, and it signifies this Sunni victory over a Shiite regime, and in a deeper sense, restoration of former glory.
Now, there are weaker countries surrounding Israel that are always focused internally, let's say Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And then there are the stronger countries that not only focus on their internal domestic issues, but also kind of this global or regional expansion like Iran, like Qatar. And I'm curious to know, what do you think Qatar's interests are with regards to Turkey's aspirations in Syria?
Right. So Qatar and Turkey closely coordinated during the Syrian civil war, jointly supporting opposition groups. And by the way, that kind of put them in a position, very problematic position, in terms of their relationship with the Gulf states, mainly Saudi Arabia. Now, in general, these two countries have a lot in common. So they are great supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are the main backers of Hamas, and they are in alignment in terms of various issues across the region, especially the war in Gaza now. So, using their strategic alliance, they're now trying to rehabilitate Syria and expand their influence over the entire region. And by the way, like I mentioned before, they both want to assert a dominant role in the Palestinian arena as well. Now, going back to Syria, so they cooperate in Syria by launching many projects, reconstruction projects, especially in the sectors, the infrastructure and energy sectors, like rebuilding power plants and energy facilities. They're also interested in building gas pipeline that would go from the Gulf all the way to Turkey through Syria, and that would potentially compete with other initiatives like the EastMed, which aims to transport natural gas from the East Mediterranean to Europe through Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. So we are seeing this collaboration forming, and I want to stress here that while Israel should obviously be happy about the weakening of Iran in the region, we might be witnessing now the emergence of a new axis, a Sunni axis led by Turkey and generously funded by Qatar.
Okay, so now let's get more updated in terms of Syria. There was, of course, a lot of hope and also concern about normalization between Israel and Syria. What is the current status of the Syria-Israel talks, and how do you think Turkey plays into that?
So I'll start with Turkey because I think it will give a good background as to what we are seeing now. So, in principle, the Turks have rejected normalization with Israel because this would essentially whitewash the Israeli image and would treat Israel as a legitimate partner in the regional order. And also an alliance between Israel and other countries, whether they are Turkish neighbors like Greece and Cyprus or any Arab state. This could promote the collaboration in the economic field and also security that could sideline Turkey, and Turkey is not interested in that. Like, for example, the EastMed initiative and the IMEC corridor initiative. So back in 2020, the Turks were not part of the Abraham Accords, but Erdogan understood, he came to realize that this rapprochement between Israel and the Arab state was inevitable. So he might as well use it to his own advantage. So by 2022, he already warmed up ties with Israel and with several Arab states. Obviously, now the situation is completely different because since October 7th, the Turks have only hardened their stance against Israel, and I don't see any prospect for normalization in the foreseeable future. Still, it's important to know that even if the Turks stay out of the picture formally, they will have a say on any future agreement between Israel and Syria because the Syrian regime is highly dependent on the Turks. And so they are probably going to set the tone. Now, I think that if the situation wasn't that unstable and the Turks were less confrontational, there was potential for collaboration, and I'll explain. I mean, that before the fall of Assad, so Syria was basically some kind of a connecting link in the Shiite corridor. And now there is the potential to turn Syria from this connecting link to a separating link, creating this Sunni buffer in this entire Shiite corridor. And this serves Turkish interest because Turkey doesn't want to see their Iran getting more and more influence and regaining its power in the region. So again, ideally there is potential, but we have to see how things play out in Syria. We just saw the recent escalation on the ground, and also be attentive to the Turkish approach to Israel.
So, bottom line, if in the long term there is some type of normalization between Syria and Israel, knowing that Turkey has a tremendous uh, impact and dominance within Syria, what does Israel need to then be concerned about?
So ideally, in if we can talk about any um, warming up of ties or an reaching understanding of some kind of peace agreement between Israel and Syria, with Turkey in the background, like you mentioned, then Israel must ensure that it can monitor the developments on the ground, especially seeing what's happening now with the prosecution of Druze and humiliating them, just like the regime did with the Alawites. So Israel has to put in place an agreement that can allow it to monitor these developments and make sure that southern Lebanon remains demilitarized. And I think that for this agreement to be effective, the US have to step in and clarify to both the Turks and the Syrian regime that they cannot allow Syria to be once again this platform for threats against Israel. And they have to prevent any actor, any hostile actor, whether it's represented by Shiite forces or Sunni forces, from posing a threat to the Golan, Galil communities, and also to the Druze living in Syria.
Noah, if we were to zoom out for a moment, not just look at the Middle East, but the world, the U.S. has a relationship with Turkey. NATO has a relationship with Turkey, and in most of the recent months, what's come under more scrutiny, the relationship between President Trump and Erdogan in Turkey. How do you think all of that would impact Israel and Israel's tenuous relationship with Turkey?
So I would like first to mention that it's true that Erdogan and Trump, we all know that they have this, let's say, quite friendly working relations. And Trump even praised Erdogan for his win in Syria, sort of saying, well played. That was like a well played move by Erdogan. But that being said, I think that the more important issue is the fact that, for example, Trump is now planning a retreat. He's planning to take out the American troops from Syria. I mean, the Pentagon drafted plans, I think, months ago, and it seems to me that this is underway. This plan is currently being executed. Now, I think it has the potential to become dangerous for Israel because especially the American troops that were there, they supported the Kurds, and they were also fighting against ISIS and also other terrorist groups in Syria. So in their absence, what we may see is it may make it easier for militants, terrorists, and weapons to go through this triangular border, the Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and make their way into Jordan and perhaps potentially threaten Israel from the eastern bank. But I think more critically, when we're talking about the Syrian front, I think Trump has backed Israel. Bottom line, Israel drew its red line successfully. It was able to establish military presence in the buffer zone and also prevent strategic capabilities from falling into the hands of the regime security forces or other hostile actors, whether they are supported by the Turks or not. And Trump's was there all the way for Israel, the way I see it. So I certainly hope that this support continues. I want to stress another point. We are seeing now the escalation in Syria. Trump removed the sanctions from the regime, or at least planning to do so. And I think this proved a mistake because the Al Jolani security forces are made up of radical Islamists, and they are now persecuting the Jews, humiliating them again, like just like they did with the Alawites. And instead of keeping southern Lebanon demilitarized, like was planned, like was agreed upon, this area was deployed with tanks and with heavy weaponry. Now, Israel could not just sit by and watch the Druze communities in Syria go through a massacre. And even if we put the Druze aside, Israel cannot allow any hostile actors, again, Sunni or Shia, doesn't matter, a rearm in southern Syria. So we have to take that into account, and I hope that the American policy with regards to Syria will reflect this important Israeli interest.
Noah Lazimi, always a pleasure chatting with you. Noah from the Miskov Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategies. Thank you for all that you are doing. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.